Okay, get the usher over here and see what he can do about it.
The holes for you. If you have any questions, please wait till later after the presentation is over with, and I'll be around here. I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. I'll stay here right till the end, okay? Spoon plugging has been described by us in the basic seminar as what makes a fish tick and what do we have to do to catch him. You've heard that a million times. But spoon plugging is also more than that. The knowledge of spoon plugging, we know is the habits of the fish, and we've heard this a million times and read it in all the material, but it's also something else. It's the ability to be able to fish in North Carolina on Monday and come up to a lake we've never seen before. On Tuesday, get off the plane at O'Hara Field, which is what I did, and come up here and fish a lake we've never seen before and be successful and catch some fish. It doesn't matter whether it's North Carolina or 1,000 miles north. The answer is spoon plugging and the knowledge of that, okay? So we're going to get into the movement of fish first. You see this slide up here. There's all kinds of fish on this side. There's the stripers, and there's the trout, and the white bass, and the smallmouth bass, and the northern pike, and the walleye. But there's a circle around one fish right there, and that's the largemouth bass. Spoon plugging is based on the movements and habits of the largemouth bass, because Mr. Perry found out a long time ago, if we learn how to catch this largemouth bass consistently, the rest of these fish just become the frosting on the cake. All fish relate to the same things the largemouth bass does. They have a few different characteristics, which I'll talk about. The walleye has a few different characteristics than does the largemouth bass, the northern and the muskie too. But they have one thing in common, which we're going to get into. Number one, all these big fish, which this is what they have in common with the largemouth bass. The largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, the northern, the muskie, and the walleye, when they reach a certain size, they become a school fish. They're no longer young fish running around in the shallows, around the lily pads and under the piers, and things that we call tournament bass. Okay? We don't mean to put down the tournament fishermen, but most of the fish that are caught through tournaments are very small. All right? What we're looking for is this school of large adult bass. And in the case of the largemouth bass, when they reach a size of approximately 3 pounds, they become a school fish. And they're very reluctant to be in the shallow water any longer than they have to, except for the spawning season. So what we're looking for is we're looking for this school of largemouth bass, 3.5 pounds to 6 pounds or whatever it is. And there's some misconceptions about the size of bass. In the south, there's a lot larger bass than what you're going to find up here. But basically, all around the country, the group of fish that you're looking for, some of the biggest in that school are 5 3/4 pounds. No matter where you go in the country, even in Florida. Now, any fish that are bigger than that will be with this school of 5 3/4 pound bass. If there's an 8-pounder, he will be with this group. He's not a lone ranger or by himself. So when you do catch one of these fish, if you were to catch a 7 3/4 pound bass, for instance, up here in Michigan, that fish would probably have lived 2 or 3 years longer than most of the fish. And that fish is what Buck used to refer to as a freak. And he will be with this school of big bass. When we get to a lake, whether it be Mona Lake or Muskegon Lake, Buck always likes to say that he knows where the fish are going to be. They're either going to be in the shallows, in the deep water, or somewhere in between. Well, people laugh at that and they say, well, anybody can figure that out, okay? But there's a little bit more to it than that. And that situation is structure. Structure's been called many things. We see on television they call an old log laying in the water structure. The reason they call it that is because they don't know what we're really talking about by the word structure. When we talk about these game fish that we're trying to catch, the northern, the bass, the walleye, whatever they may be, the one thing that they have in common is structure. The second thing that they have in common is that they're a school fish, and the home of this fish is in deep water. These fish don't live under the lily pads, they don't live under the piers, they don't live in a canal or a creek. These fish, the home of the fish is in deep water, the deepest water available to them. Now there's a few different characteristics, I'm going to mention that again, but we'll get to it as we go along here. What we do to make things very simple is separate the shallows from the deep water. This makes it easy for us to understand what we have to do to catch a fish, what we have to do in the process of elimination to arrive at the fish. We feel that anything less than 10 feet, anything shallower than 10 feet of water, we refer to as the shallows. Water deeper than 10 feet, we refer to as the deeper water. This way we can split it right in two. And in our process of elimination, of both trolling and casting, we can eliminate the shallows and then begin to work on the deep water. But keep in mind that the home of the fish is in deep water. I want to say around the country, what's the average depth? It has a lot to do with the watercolor. But you could say around 35 feet. In most lakes, 35 feet. That's the approximate depth of what we call a sanctuary, where the fish spend most of their time. And this long ridge type structure you see right here, and you'll continue to see, is a bar as it runs out from the shallows all the way to the deep water. When you look at a structure situation, many guys find a little short point in the reservoir sticking off, and they think that's a bar. It runs out to 10 feet and it drops to 14 feet. Well, there's all kinds of them. For instance, down in Tennessee on the TVA system, like in Lake Chickamauga, they drop to 10 feet. They drop from 10 feet to 15 feet to 16 feet to 17 feet. It runs a quarter of a mile out in the lake before it drops off in the river channel. That's not a structure situation. Why not? Because it doesn't run all the way from the shallows to the deep water. It doesn't go all the way. And as we get into this, we'll keep talking about going all the way. Okay? We just went over this, just keep going. This is the fish in the sanctuary and where they appear. Now it would seem that all we have to do is continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and we'll always be able to reach the sanctuary and reach the fish. Now that's not so. That's not so. It appears right here that the fish are somewhere near the base of the structure, but remember, they could be quite a distance from it. No, put them on there. Yeah. They could be all the way to the right, 100 feet, or all the way to the left, 200 feet. They're not necessarily right at the base of that particular structure, where they'd be easy to reach by just going down further and further and further. When they're in the sanctuary down there, they're very dormant and they're very non-chasing. They're very hard to catch. But lucky for us, once or twice a day, depending on the weather conditions, the clarity of the water, they'll move toward the shallows, not into the shallows, but toward the shallows. And this is what we call a movement. And when they begin to move and get active and this movement occurs, they begin to migrate up the structure toward the shallows. How shallow they come, as far as depth goes, and how long they stay depends on the weather and the water conditions on that day, on that lake, at the time that you're out there. The most common type of structure that you'd find in most lakes, even out here in Lake Muskegon, it might be covered up with weeds, but it's there. When that big reed line runs out there from the shallows to the deep water, that's a long bar. You go over to Lake Mona, you have long bars that run out from the points, some of them on the side, some of them right on the point, into the deepest water available. The most common structure that we're looking for is this long ridge type structure. Now there's some problems involved here because we kept using these slides, and these slides were duplicated in some of the material. And it always shows the deep water right off the end of the bar, right on the tip of the bar. So there's been some confusion recently of some of the ends of some of these bars, like for instance over in Lake Mona, are flat. Most of the best breaks are on the side. You come to this lake right here, you've got some breaks off the end, okay, very deep water, but you've also got some good sharp breaks on the side. You go to most reservoirs, and you'll see a slide when we get into the structure situations, where all the breaks are on the side and the end of the bar is flat. So the confusion has come that everyone is fishing at the end of the bar, expecting that the deep water and the fish and the contact point is going to be there, and sometimes it can be on the side. Now, how do you know that? Well, there's a couple of ways to know that. One of them is through the process of elimination, of running the lures, trolling, and locating the fish. But the best way to know where they're going to come from is to know how to map and interpret structure. That's the best way. Because then, when you can map and interpret the structure, you know if the deep water is on the side or it's off the end. You know that. It takes some practice, and it takes a little bit of knowledge to do this. But that's the fastest and the best way. In time, after practice, you'll be able to go out and look at a structure situation, put a marker down, begin to map it, and say the deepest water in the area is right here. On this, it's on the side, or off the end, wherever it is. And you'll be able to put the marker down and say the contact point should be right here. Because this is the fastest break to the deepest water in the area. A break in a break line, for the people that are here, that are spoon pluggers, they know what breaks and break lines are. But we're going to talk about something that everybody will understand, even our brand new people. It's a drop off. It's an abrupt change of depth. Where the abrupt change of depth takes place, the fastest break to the deepest water in the area, that is where the fish are going to come up. And if you can identify that, you'll know just how to make your trolling passes, and if you catch a fish, you'll know exactly where to anchor the boat. So the mapping and interpretation, that's where that comes in. Do they come up on the side, or do they come up off the end? All right, so that's very important. Now, we had a conversation about this. Some people read the material, and they read it this way. That where the fish come up, where the contact point should be the deepest break into the deep water of the structure. That's not so. That's not the way to interpret it. The way it's interpreted is the fastest break to the deepest water in the area, not the deepest break to the deepest water in the area. That's not correct. Okay, so we start right there. Now this shows the fish on a movement. It shows that they came out of the sanctuary and they approached the structure. They need this structure because they need a path to the shoreline, need a path to the shallows. If they don't have a path, if they don't have something to follow, they're never going to appear there. Now this shows what happens during the movement period. One bass came all the way up on top of the bar. If the drop-off was at about, say 15 or 20 feet, this fish came up to about 18 feet or 17 feet, but the school remained just off the drop-off, just right on the edge of it or just below it. This is very common, and this is a good movement right here. This is an excellent movement. You shouldn't expect any more than this. This is an excellent movement. You would have to have excellent water conditions and excellent weather conditions for a school of big fish to move to the 8 to 10 foot depth. A school of big fish. And we're going to talk about this school business and what can happen as you go on. But for them to come that far as a group, where you could catch them on every cast, it just doesn't happen too often unless those conditions are, like I said, ideal. When that school of big fish reach a depth of 8 to 10 feet, they pull back. They're very reluctant to come any shallower than that. But if a movement like that occurred, what would happen is that school of large fish would stop at the 8 to 10 foot level. The smaller bass would go into the shallows, or smaller fish, whatever they may be, walleyes they could be, and maybe one or two big ones would go into the shallows. Now the fisherman would be aware that the fish are biting. He would catch, if he was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, casting the shoreline, he would catch several small bass, and if he makes the right cast at the right time, he may catch that one or two larger fish that moved in the shallows. But while his bass boat is sitting out here and he's casting toward the shallows, look what's going on behind him. That school of big fish is right behind him. Probably half of them are under his boat. Okay? So this is the problem. Once that movement period is over with, that migration is over with, they follow the same route down and they go right back in the sanctuary where it all started. And they'll stay there until the next movement period occurs. Now we get into the analytical part of it. Before you even ask this question, I'll tell you I'm not going to answer it. What makes them move? What time will they be there? Who the hell knows? It's up to you to be there. They're not going to be there when you're out there, unless you're out there. And they're not going to be there when it's convenient for you. Right away, people want to analyze it. Well, we're going to give you something better than analyzing the thing. We don't know what makes them move. We don't know when they're going to be there. If they moved at 8 o'clock this morning, there hasn't been a weather change. Nothing has happened on the water. There's been no changes. Chances are around the same time they may be there. The word may again, at the same time the next day. But they may come at 1:30 in the afternoon too. So Buck fortunately gave us a guideline to follow. If you don't hit a movement of fish before 10 o'clock in the morning, don't leave the water between 10 and 2. Because chances are there's going to be one big movement that day. It's going to come between 10 and 2. It can come on the hottest day of the year, the worst day of the year, when it's 100 degrees outside, and believe me, I know about 100 degrees. Since the middle of May, we haven't had one day down in North Carolina under 90 degrees. And just yesterday I talked to my wife, the heat index was 115 and the temperature was about 99.9. We've had several days over 100 degrees, so I know what heat is. And some of those fish were moving right in the afternoon at 1:30 in the afternoon. All right, so that if you haven't caught a fish before 10 o'clock in the morning, don't leave the lake between 10 and 2. If you caught the fish before 10 o'clock in the morning and no weather change is taking place and no weather change is going to take place, chances are you may get another movement toward evening. As the weather improves and stays steady, you could get 2 movements a day, one early and one late. After a while, there's going to be a weather condition that we're going to talk about that's going to change all of that when it starts to come. They can't see that at all. Okay, unfortunately, that's a bar with weeds that come right to the drop-off. I showed you a clean one before, like down in North Carolina. You see all the weeds out here in Lake Muskegon? Where's Don Stevens? To find grass like that, I have to go up on the shoreline in North Carolina. That red clay just don't grow no weeds down there, okay? But the weed line, ouch. The weed line comes right to the drop-off. It's the same slide with the weed line coming right to the drop-off. Now let's see how the fish react to that type of a situation. It doesn't matter if it's a 17 feet of weeds out here in Lake Muskegon, or if it's a 14 feet of weeds. If it comes right out to the break line, right to the drop-off, let's see how they react. We put them in the sanctuary, number 1, just like they were before, same place. Okay, Rod. The fish move. The same thing happens. 1 or 2 big fish may go into the weeds. The smaller fish will scatter into the weeds. Now, I said the smaller fish would scatter into the shallows before. Now I say they'll scatter into the weeds. Now I'm going to tell you why the smaller fish scatter into the weeds and scatter into the shallows. It should be easy to figure out. The big fish are behind them. They know the big fish are active. We don't. They know they are. And they're going to get eaten if they don't get out of there. So that's why they go into the shallows. It's that simple. That group of big fish will stop at the base of that weed line. They'll stop at the base of that weed line. That's as far as they'll come. It's the same thing. Remove the weeds, they stop in the same place. Excellent weather condition now. Excellent weather condition. Do they move all the way into the weeds, the school, because the weeds are there? No, they don't. They stay on the edge of the weeds. The whole school doesn't move to 8 feet inside the weeds. Why? They don't know any more where they're going in there than you would. Okay? They don't know it unless there's a slot in there or some way they can wind their way through there. There's no path through those weeds, so that school does not go there. They stop at the base break line. When you catch fish on the inside of the weed line up here during the spawning season and the pre-spawn, those fish have a path to the shoreline, down that weed line and around it, or a slot to get through it. They can't come through those heavy weeds all the way to the shoreline. They'd be lost. There's nothing for them to follow. So that school will stop right there. This is what it looks like from above. What about a lake like this? This is a lake that has no deep water. Where's the home of the fish here? This is a lake that could be 7, 8, 9 feet deep. It's choked with weeds and lily pads. I think you can see that on the slide. Where's the home of the fish? The only place they can go to escape one thing, the light condition. And I waited to mention it here because we're getting toward what's going to become important about the weather and the water. The light condition. The home of the fish is under the weeds. Under the weeds. The only place that they can go, but they relate to open pockets or slots or sparse weed pockets. When they become active, because they are located around those areas, they will now move to the edge of those pockets and in around those slots, and they'll be able to be caught. You don't have too many lakes like that around here, and you don't run into too many situations like that. But that's what that's like. Yeah, okay. All right. Go to the next. There's nothing, I don't care how well you can cast, how well you control. I'll go to a spoon plugger yard. There's nothing that's going to control how many fish you catch or how successful you are during the fishing season. Nothing will control it more than the weather and the water conditions that are present on the day that you're out there fishing or on the lake that you're fishing. Okay? And weather is good and it's bad and it's seasonal. Seasonal weather up here, and I lived in the Midwest for a long time, so up here I know what seasonal means. It's cold most of the time. I was freezing this morning, for crying out loud. It's going to be colder tonight. But good or bad, we're going to be out there. Now let's talk about good or bad. Let's talk about watercolor. I'll describe what they are for you so you know. Number 1, clear water. Number 2, yellow-green watercolor. Number 3 is a white sandy water. Number 4 is a red sandy, and number 5 is what they call black or brown cypress water, tea-colored water. We can talk about each one of them, but we're going to say which one's the best first, so we don't have to go through a long, drawn-out process about this watercolor. I've about worn Don Stevens out with the watercolor. I don't want to wear him out no more. Okay? As they're listed right there, number 1 is not the best. Okay? Number 5 is right where it belongs. All right? But number 1 is not the best. I see on television, I watch these tournament guys, and they're running around in the muddy lake looking for the clear water. That's the most ridiculous thing, and here's why. The tournament is being held during the pre-spawn time for the bass or during the spawning season, and they're looking for the clear water so they can see the fish down in the water on the bed. That's why they're looking for the clear water. The best watercolor, the number 1 best one that's on that screen right there, you don't have in the whole state of Michigan, or Wisconsin, or Indiana. Well, maybe Indiana, maybe southern Indiana, I don't know, but you don't have it in Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, or Minnesota. It's a white sandy watercolor, a white sandy. It's found usually in artificial reservoirs, almost exclusively. And in the white sandy water, we don't have here's a 700 series spoon plug, about that size, white or yellow. You can't see it more than 6 inches under the surface. That's great watercolor. That's ideal. 6 to 10 inches under the surface, that lure will disappear, a white or yellow 700. The next best watercolor up there is a red sandy. You don't have any of that either. Okay? You don't have that here either. Red sandy is mostly where you see the red clay blanks around the artificial reservoirs. We got a lot of that down in North Carolina. We got some white sandy down in North Carolina, and we got some clear water in North Carolina. So the second best watercolor is number 4. The one that is good, that you do have, and you have a bunch of lakes like that around here, and you have some lakes which are clear, but then they get a yellow-green, which is number 2. That's the third best. They get a yellow-green algae bloom where you don't want to swim in there. It smells a little bit. The water skiers don't like the lake, which is too bad about them. And the jet skiers, they don't like the lake because it'll actually put a stain on your boat. Some of it gets like green paint. That is a great watercolor for the Midwest. In a yellow-green lake, varying on the degree of how green it is, the lure can disappear within 4 inches of the surface, or a foot of the surface, or a foot and a half. This is good watercolor. This is fishing water. So when your lake turns yellow-green and the bloom comes on the lake, that's the time. This lake right here, Don told me today, never used to be that clear until the mussels got in it. Otherwise it got an algae bloom, correct guys? It got an algae bloom, and it would make the fishing better. And the weeds wouldn't come out so far, perhaps. But right now the mussels have cleared the lake up. Lake Mona right now is beginning to have a little bit of a yellow-green tint to it. As an example, if you want to see a lake that's beginning to get a little algae bloom on it, take a look at Lake Mona. That's pretty good watercolor. You can see down about 2 feet. I think we measured it 2 feet. About 2 feet in Lake Mona. It could be better, but that's the best watercolor out of the 2 lakes. The fourth best watercolor is the clear. Now we used to have the clear ranked last, but I'll tell you why it's better than the black and brown cypress. The worst watercolor to fish in is the black and brown cypress. It has an appearance of being brown or black, but if it doesn't have an algae bloom on it, it's as clear as a clear water lake. Now I'm going to tell you why the clear water lake is better than the cypress water. The clear water lakes, as Muskegon is, have good break lines. They have good deep weed lines, which is a break line, a place that the fish will pause or stop in their movements and migrations on the structure. They have deeper break lines, base break lines, or a deeper break line of 35 or 40 feet that'll break to 70. They're usually big, deep, clear lakes. They have structure situations of break lines that you and I as spoon pluggers, now that we have wire line and we've got the best depth finders in the world, and we got the best this and the best that, and we know how to map the bars, we can check the edge of a 21-foot weed line or 17-foot weed line. We can move out down the slope and go to 32 feet, 28 feet, 29 feet. We can fish the 35 or 40-foot break line with wire line, dropping off into the deep hole or the channel if it's a reservoir. So the Clearwater Lake gives us good break lines going all the way from the shallows on the major structure to the deep water. In contrast to that, the cypress water, if it doesn't get the algae bloom, it's a shallow lake. The deepest water in there may be 25 or 30 feet. It may be a flowage or an artificial reservoir. Deepest water 25 or 35 or 40 feet. It's got shallow break lines, bars with break lines that are 8 to 10 feet, 11 to 12 feet, and they drop off into 25, and the movements are very bad under marginal weather conditions. Go ahead. One of the most important things that you can do is learn how to read the weather map. We're going to talk about some weather changes, some cold fronts and stuff, but the major thing that you're interested in is low pressure and high pressure systems. Most of your weather comes from the west. You can see what happened here. We had some pretty good fishing conditions Monday. The fellows that were here Monday, I was here Tuesday and Wednesday were good. Thursday we started to get that front come through. We got some clear skies. Today it cleared up again. It looks like it's going to be washed out tomorrow. So the low pressure system moved through and the high pressure system is now here. We're now in what we call a cold front. The people in Michigan that aren't used to 90-degree heat, the easiest way to describe it is you had the 90-degree heat, and all of a sudden we have what we have right now. It's not a matter of the temperature change, it's this low and high pressure system. Our weather moves from west to east most of the time. So when you can read the weather map and you've got a day to go fishing, you'll see where the low pressure system is. Is the low pressure system in Illinois so that you're fishing on the front side of the low if you live in Michigan? Is that where it's at? Or is the low pressure system going to hit the night before or the day before you're going to go fishing in Michigan? Now my good buddy is here, Vic Saunders, who he and I worked with Buck for years together. And what we used to do when we were young and could run around a lot, what we would do is watch the weather map. And if the low pressure system was coming toward us, and it was in Wisconsin, we would not go fishing in Wisconsin. We would stay ahead of the low pressure system because the big high was coming behind it. We were going to have washed out skies in Wisconsin, a lot of wind, and a big temperature drop, which would be uncomfortable for us. The fish don't pay any attention to the temperature drop, but they do the light condition. So what Vic and I would do, we would either drive to Michigan or drive to Indiana to go fishing. We would stay ahead of the low pressure system. It didn't matter that we had to drive 4 hours or 5 hours. Whatever we had to do, we worked 5 days a week on construction, and we worked like dogs. So when it came time to go fishing, we were not going to fish under the worst possible circumstances. We were going to fish under the best possible circumstances. And most of the time we wound up in Indiana and Michigan, in southern Michigan especially, because Wisconsin's the home of bad weather. Believe me, it's terrible. Okay, so learn how to read the weather map. Stay in front of the low pressure system or right in the low pressure system, and avoid fishing in the high pressure system if you can. If you are in a high pressure system, it's not a good day possibly to fish Lake Muskegon unless you're used to fishing ultra deep with wire line. Now ultra deep, some people say, well, ultra deep, I go down 50, 60 feet. You better try fishing 8 feet before you go down 50 feet. Take one thing at a time. You're better off on a day like today with a washed out sky. Pick a little lake like Lake Mona that's dark water, that you know very well, that's got good structure and a lot of fish in it, and stay with those fish on Lake Mona. If you're experienced in the use of wire line and trolling deep, and you don't mind trolling to catch all your fish without too much of a chance of getting into them casting because of the weather situation and the clear water, then you'll be able to fish here, regardless of the weather condition. Let's go by this. Yeah, we can't even see those. I knew we couldn't. Okay, go by them. We can't see them. Oh, there, we can see that. Okay, right there, Rock. That's good. What happens when that funnel system moves through, as you've seen before, what happens in most lakes is this. The fish drop off deeper than the sanctuary. They drop off into some of the deepest water in the lake. You'll be lucky to have a movement. The water clarity will have everything to do with it. They'll remain right there until this weather condition, until this high pressure system moves out of here. The people that were here Monday, and I was here Tuesday and Wednesday, we know we had good movements over on Lake Mona. It's slowing up a little bit, and because of this high pressure system. And these fish are going to remain dormant, most of them, and deep. We're going to catch some smaller fish, and because we're spoon pluggers, we're going to catch several pretty good fish, but we're not going to hit those big movements because the mass of these fish is now in the deepest water in the area, the deepest water available to them on the structure situation that they're on. When things begin to improve a little bit, we get some humidity in the air and some high cirrus clouds. Just keep flipping through there, they can hardly see them. That's the cold front clouds. These fish, if we get the same condition like yesterday and then today, this is the same thing that we have. Can't even see the thing. This clear blue sky, all right, hold it right there. If conditions begin to improve tomorrow, if they begin to improve, what may happen is a few fish you see that the main school is not in the sanctuary yet. They're still in the deepest water in the area, but a few fish have migrated toward the structure. A few fish have decided to move. They became active. If we catch these 2 or 3 big fish on a day like today, we've done well. We've done well, no matter where we're fishing. It's all we should expect. We should understand we're in the middle of a big high pressure system. These fish here, as you see them in the sanctuary, this is a typical structure. It's going to have some breaks on it, and this is what I want to talk about, breaks. On the Bassmaster show, these things are called structure, okay? Well, the structure is the long bar. The breaks on the structure are the things that they usually refer to. Now, we've got several break lines on here, and we're going to move these fish around as we have this weather condition take place. We've got a weed line at 7 feet. We've got a rock pile at about 10 to 12 feet. We got a stump out there somewhere about 13 feet. And we've got a drop off at 18 to 20 feet, and then we got the fish in the sanctuary. okay? We get some moisture in the air and the high winds stop that are usually associated with this kind of a high pressure system, we get some humidity. It starts to get warm outside. It's getting warm out because there's humidity, the temperature's going up, it's getting hot. And the fish have their first movement after being down in that deepest water as the weather improved. It may be the second day of improvement. The first day that the weather improved, you only caught 2 or 3 fish. The next day the weather continued to improve and you got a pretty good movement right to the drop-off. Now that's a pretty good movement. That's the kind of movement you're going to run into most of the time. That movement may last 10 minutes, it may last 15 minutes, it may last 20 minutes, and then they go right back down again until they move again. If conditions improve later that evening or the following day, and you begin to get a lot of heavy cloud cover, and you know there's another low pressure system beginning to move through, the next movement that comes, this could be later in the evening or it could be the next morning, they may move to this area where these stumps are, these breaks on the structure where the fish can pause or stop in their movements and migration toward the shallows, not into the shallows, but toward the shallows. If conditions continue to improve, and the low pressure system, we're fishing right in it right now, it may start to rain, the cloud cover will get, you can't see it. Go ahead. Cloud cover will get heavier and heavier. You can see it's raining outside. The next movement that may come later would be the excellent movement that we're talking about. Good watercolor, overcast skies, it's raining, and the fish come right to the 8 to 10 foot break line. 1 or 2 big fish move in along the 7 foot weed line. The small fish scatter into the weeds. The school remains out there at about 10 feet on the rock pile. That's the break on the structure. They passed the drop off. They passed the first break on structure, which would be a stump roll or whatever. They're on to the second break on the structure, which is the rock pile at 10 feet. This would be that excellent movement. This is what it looks like from above. When that movement is over with, sure, the weather, it continues to rain. It's still cloudy, it's still dark, it's still cloudy. Conditions are still excellent, but the activity period is over with. The movement is over with. So the fish back off and they drop off deep again. If in fact that low pressure system moves through and you wake up in the morning, you can't see that sky, but you can look out here and see that one, and that's just what it says. And you see that sky begin to take place in the morning when the sun's coming up, you're in for a rough day, because here's what happened. Right back they go into the deepest water in the area. And they'll remain there as a school, maybe a few stragglers coming up at one time or another. They'll remain there as a school until the weather begins to improve again. If you're fishing a lake that has deep breaks or deep break lines, 35, 40 feet, you can get down there and troll with wire and get them. You might be able to get some, because they may become active down there, but they will not move, they will not migrate toward the structure. If a movement period takes place, it will be very short, and you'll get little or no movement toward the structure. Try this. Spin it around. Go ahead. These are the most important points of what we covered. The deep water is the home of the fish. This you have to believe. You cannot believe that that fish is under that pier and you can come there and cast 22 times and you can't catch him. If you believe that, you're all wrong. That's not the case. The home of the water is in deep, the home of the fish is in deep water, and that's where they spend the majority of their time. Number 2, periodically they become active, and they may move toward the shallows. What's going to control that is the weather and the water conditions. Number 3, it's not a haphazard movement, but it's on a path. The path being the long ridge-type structure. Number 4, the routes are on structure. Okay. Number 5, when they move, they pause or stop at breaks or break lines, rock piles, the edge of a weed line, or drop off, which is an abrupt change in depth, and they don't move constantly nor consistently. Now, this is the thing about reading the material. You ask a guy, oh, I've read it all. I've read the Green Book. I got the home study course. I've got it all, you know. But I'm still, this fish is still not there when I'm there. You know, did you ever read the part about that the fish don't move constantly or consistently, and you may have to exercise patience and wait for the fish to move? He says, gee, I don't remember reading that. Okay, well, this is what happens. You have to wait sometimes. You have to spend some time on the water. The fish are not there when you're available, as I've said in the beginning of this thing. I want you to spin that around to the presentation of lures, okay? The stuff up there for you to take a look at. If you can't find a casting rod there to look at, I'm sure that one of the guys will show you what he's casting with, okay? So I'm not going to go into no tackle talk. I'm not up here selling lures, okay? Now, the presentation of lures is a combination between trolling and casting. Spoon plugging has been identified as a trolling system. Nothing could be further from the truth. The combination of trolling and casting, the combination of being able to anchor the boat and make the cast and catch the fish. This is what we're always working toward. It's not always possible. There were some good catches of northerns made by several people today. John Bales, for instance, on 28 to 34 feet on wire line. That's the way he got them. He couldn't get in an anchoring position out there and all that wind to catch those fish, and chances are they were scattered along there, right, John? They were scattered, and he had to cover a lot of water to catch them. That's a trolling situation. The weather condition dictated the depth. The movement situation at that depth dictated a trolling situation, so trolling was the best way to get them. John has made several good catches at this outing, and most of those casting on Hess Lake and on Lake Mona. In fact, he was kind enough to provide me with a map of Lake Mona, and that's why I knew where I was going when I got out there. And this is what one guy can do for another, all right? So I didn't have to waste no time. I had John's map. Now remember, it's a combination of casting and trolling. What we use here is we use the free running bottom bumping lure, which is a spoon plug. We cannot orderly eliminate the unproductive water, arrive at the fish by working a lake out. And I'm using my own words now, not Buck's. Buck's are much better than mine. I'm doing the best I can. You can't do it with a jig, and you can't do it with a spinner bait, and you can't do it with a deep diving plug. To locate these fish, you have to be able to control your depth and your speed. That controls that we bypassed here. We'd be here all night if we went through all that stuff. The depth and the speed is what you have to concern yourself with, strictly. We need a tool that no matter how fast we go, within reason, we're not talking about 150 horsepower motor, but we're talking about speeds up to 8, 9 miles an hour, that lure will maintain its depth by the length of line that we release, the length of line that's let out. So we have to have a tool, and a good one. We have to be able to cover it from the shallows all the way to the deep water. You see 7 spoon plugs up there. The smallest is 2 to 4 feet, and the largest will run out to about 25, 27 feet, depending on the length of line. Did Mr. Perry stop there? No. He instructed us and gave us more information about the use of wire line, which will double the depth of each one of those lures. So it's possible to go down 50 feet if you have to. Most of the time you won't have to. So with the use of wire line, we can double the running depth of those lures. And I'll say it again, those 7 lures from 0 or 2 feet all the way out to 25 to 27 feet. And if we use wire instead of the no-boat trolling line, we can double that depth. Now this is the thing where there's more confusion about how to run these lures. And it's a very simple process. On a heavy weed line out here in Muskegon Lake, you may have to stack your lures on the edge of the weed line, and you'll see that as we go along here. But where on Lake Mona, where you can start with the 500 and troll up against a 4-foot weed line, there's a lot of spoon pluggers here, so I'm not going to just go over this thing over and over. I'm just going to show you some of the things that happen. You put on the smallest lure and you make a trailing pass. And you vary your speed as you go from fast to very fast. Not slow, from fast to very fast. The warmer the water, the faster the speed, especially checking the shallows. That's all you got to know. The warmer the water, the faster the speed. You turn the boat in until the lure starts to bump the bottom. When the lure starts to bump the bottom, you slowly turn the boat away from the shore. Not at hard right angles or anything like that, but slowly move the boat out till the lure runs free. When it runs free, turn the boat back in till the lure hits the bottom. It's all described in the Green Book and in the home study course. You've just checked 2 to 4 feet deep. Now you're going to check depths from 4 to 6 feet deep. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to put the lure in the water, run the line out 25 or 30 yards of line. You're going to turn the boat in until the lure starts to hit the bottom. Slowly turn the boat out until the lure runs free. I didn't say anything about running a certain depth on the depth finder. Even though you have the depth finder running, and it's your guide, you're using it as a guide, but you have to let the lure walk the bottom. You have to let the lure do the bottom bumping and telling you when it's running free and when it's bumping the bottom. All of you know this, so we'll just move right through again because I want to show you what happens. Now you're going to check the depths out to 6 to 9 feet, 6 to 8 feet. And it's the same process. Turn the boat in until the lure hits the bottom. Turn the boat out till the lure runs free. Now you've checked the shallows on the bar. You check the water out to 8 to 10 feet. This is what you've done. Now, what the confusion comes from is here. The confusion